Up to tossing grenade the windmills. Windmills.
Precyber by T.C. Ricks and Ken Leitner. Chapter 41. It was a party. Ezekiel had gone to a lot of those. It was part of the job. How much he had to suffer fools frustrated him, though. True, his intelligence beat most people in one form or another. Even a small number of people more conventionally intelligent were certainly not as socially intelligent or as emotionally intelligent as he was. And he had never met his equal at understanding the true nature of man. Still, Ezekiel chose the people in his inner circle carefully. He did not like associating himself with yes-men and sycophants. He did have a natural desire sometimes to choose naive people with whom he might keep his secrets safe. But then he remembered the phrase, "Hell is the people you're with," like this party. He saw a few of his peers here, but it was mainly government folks. The government was far weaker than it had once been, but it still clung to a few shreds of power. The time had come to change that, and Ezekiel planned to do that at this party. He had waited long enough, but he had finally maneuvered the pieces into place. He only had to set things in motion. "Senator, I was wondering if I could have a moment of your time." Senator Mentiroso, a balding man with white hair and a flat nose, was a staunch defender of the rights of Latin America and the need to keep a vibrant U.S. foreign policy there. While the U.S. had withdrawn from most of the rest of the world, the senator managed to use the arcane rules of the Senate to ensure that a significant portion of the remainder of the defense budget went towards maintaining that U.S. presence. Some called it the last outpost of the American Empire, but not in the presence of Senator Mentiroso. The senator smiled. "Of course, Mr. Norne. Come this way." They both walked out on the balcony. Ezekiel looked up at a sky full of bright stars, something he never saw in his midtown penthouse. These wealthy, remote suburban enclaves enjoyed an industry-free environment. Helen had once been a tourist haven, and still was, though few of those tourists hailed from America these days. It boasted excellent beer, which both Norne and Mentiroso drank tonight. Ezekiel asked, "Have you had a chance to think a bit more about my proposal?" "Which one?" "Hammerfell." Mentiroso's brow furrowed. I don't know if the public is ready to accept it still." "Who cares what the public thinks?" "The public, in this case, being everyone who still matters in the Senate and the business community. I rather doubt your rivals are ready to accept so much power at the hands of your corporation." "I'm sure they will if the circumstances were right." Ezekiel knew he did not need to elaborate much there. I see. Still. Mentiroso stood but metaphorically rubbed his hands with his expression and his silence. "What will it take, Joseph?" Mentiroso was a notorious backstabber, willing to shift sides at his own whim and convenience. It was how he retained power in the Senate, despite his unpopularity. But Ezekiel knew how it worked. He was like an investment. Those who understood him gained power from him. Those who did not lost it. "There is an incident in Colombia that requires urgent attention. Some people need to die. It cannot be traced to the government in any way." "That can easily be arranged." "I will send you the details in the morning. Do this, and I will put your bill on the floor." Ezekiel raised his bottle to Mentiroso's. "Then we have an agreement, Senator," he smiled. Ezekiel retired from the party to his own penthouse. He called a few of his closest workers in for a little party and some late-night planning. He had another opportunity tonight to move one step closer to his goal. He wanted to move quickly before the window closed. Mike would handle the favor in Colombia. Lyson would do the dirty work. He had a short flight home, but he lingered upstairs, making arrangements with his social secretary while Lyson and Mike arrived and made themselves drinks. Tonight, he wanted girls. He knew Lyson loved to indulge himself as well. He was less sure of Mike. He had not invited Mike upstairs but once or twice before. He had chosen leather for Lyson, a sporty girl for Mike. and a geeky girl for himself. The fact that his choice looked very close to Emily escaped his notice. Once he completed these arrangements, he headed downstairs to his guests. The girl should arrive in 30 minutes. He liked to time box meetings like this. If they lasted too long, he tended to reveal too much. The late-night entertainment should provide a nice end-cap to the business of the evening. "Ah, Mr. Norne, I see you don't mind us helping ourselves to your bar," Lyson said with a smirk. "Of course not, Lyson. I wouldn't ask you up here if I hadn't meant to be unpleasant." Ezekiel smiled back and winked. He liked to remind people of their station, and then pretending he was joking. He'd learned about the technique while reading a psychology textbook. "Have a seat, gentlemen. I have a new opportunity to discuss with you," Ezekiel continued. The three sat down and listened carefully while Ezekiel related his earlier discussions. Mike sat on a plush leather easy chair next to the fireplace. Lyson chose the red velvet couch that one of Ezekiel's mistresses had brought somewhere in France. Ezekiel had to admit that one had taste. Ezekiel turned to Mike first. His job seemed easier to Michael. "So, Mike, you're on the Columbia thing. Tell me what you need." Mike shrugged. "Doesn't sound like much anything special. I'll just need money for the expenses. Maybe a few covert clearances on intelligence lists to move things around. Can I let you know tomorrow?" "You can let me know when it's done if you like." "No, Lyson, your part's a bit trickier. I need information from you. I need something I can use on Monterosso, something to get us leverage. I suspect he will move slowly once our part is complete. He'll need prodding to get this through before his next election. He thinks the world revolves around him. He's smart enough not to fuck with me, but that won't stop him from being unacceptably slow." Lyson nodded slowly and said, "Okay, Mr. Norne, but there may not be anything there. We looked for stuff on the guy when he was elected. Hell, everybody's looked for stuff on the guy." Ezekiel snapped back. Sure. But then it was just routine. Now I need something. God damn it, create some dirt if I can't find any. Just give me something to use." Mike reclined back on his seat uncomfortably. Lyson replied, "Of course, Mr. Norne. Just as you say. Just wanted to make sure you knew that we weren't what we were up against. There's always some risk in creating dirt, you know." "Of course I know that. You always say that, but I have faith in your abilities, Lyson. You've never let me down, right?" Lyson never had an opportunity to answer as the girls came busting through at that moment. The leather check came in first. She wore a short, tight black skirt, a leather bandeau, and a leather bolero. She was petite, with dark hair and red lips. Ezekiel doubted the skirt would cover her adequately should she bend over too far. Lyson immediately forgot their conversation and went to meet her. He put his hand around her bare waist and dragged her off to the corner. Like Ezekiel, Lyson hated making small talk with paid dates. He would maneuver her into the private guest rooms as quickly as he could. The second girl wore a tight, strapless blue lycra dress. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a little muscle in her arms and legs. She introduced herself as Bunny. Ezekiel directed her over to Mike, who had moved over to the couch. Lastly came the girl that Ezekiel had selected for himself, a slightly less classy version of Emily. She wore denim shorts, a black t-shirt, and tennis shoes. Her makeup was a bit heavier, and strong perfume preceded her. She said, "Eliza." Ezekiel offered her a drink and then set her down on the couch with Mike to his date. The two girls and Mike carried the conversation. Ezekiel just sat lost in his thoughts, enjoying the human intimacy his money easily bought. People who said money could not buy happiness had obviously never had enough money. Ezekiel remembered that Lyson had failed in the past. Tonight was a breakthrough too long coming. Ezekiel knew he had to become complacent, hedonistic. He recalled the time when he spent all his time and money in relentless pursuit of his goals, and now he found himself next to Emily or Eliza or whatever, hoping for a little meaningless encounter. Lyson was right. Ezekiel needed to watch the risks more closely. He stole a glance over towards Lyson. He lay on a recliner with his date, straddling his body. She had removed the bandeau, unbuttoning the bolero, and was teasing him with her exposed, perky chest. Ezekiel turned away, slightly disgusted. Lyson was a large old man, and the leather girl was young enough to be his daughter. Ezekiel enjoyed the perks of power, but he remembered the times when he had a cause as well. Government had become unacceptably broken. They kept lowering taxes and spending more than they had. They spent on such wasteful things like bridges to empty islands, expensive improvements on little-used airports, useless military hardware, and welfare programs the nation could not afford on people who did not matter. Ezekiel decided to change things and worked relentlessly to push the corrupt government aside. He believed that the true solution was a free market. He had the stomach to do what needed to be done. The ends justified the means. Of course, Ezekiel reflected, if you work in the sewer, you go home stinking. Ezekiel had surrounded himself with people like Lyson, and now he enjoyed certain things that would never have thought possible. But what harm could there be in indulging in the world's oldest profession? Ezekiel turned to Eliza and slid his hand around her waist. She turned back to him and smiled. He tugged her toward him and then climbed across his lap and placed her arms around his neck. Yes, he needed this. He needed a little release from the pressures. He buried his hand in her long hair and breathed in her strong scent. She leaned forward, pressed her body to his, and nibbled on his ear. He closed his eyes and focused on Eliza. And yet Ezekiel still plodded. Even while he gave his body over to his sin, his mind kept ticking off ideas. Aqua Nowhere was losing popularity. He needed something to remind people why they needed the Pinkertons. He needed something to make people fear the bump in the night and to seek protection. People relinquished power when they were afraid. He could make his move in the aftermath of a disaster. He remembered a famous quote from some politician long forgotten. Never let a crisis go to waste. People could accept change during a crisis, and if they could hope for safety, terror. He needed terror. Under the cover of a war against terror, he could do as he liked.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson. Copyright 2012.
Kenneth Leitner
and Red Anvil Amalgamated.
to fight the forces of evil!